Ladies and gentlemen, I regret that I can't be with you in person this morning. But because this subject is very important to me, I wanted to send you this message. These days, the news from Africa is much better than it used to be. Growth is fast, widespread and enduring. The number of people in poverty has dropped for the first time in decades. Inflows of private capital now exceed those of foreign aid. But the best news is about better government policies. By deciding to make peace, by deciding to balance budgets, by deciding to liberalize key markets like telecom, and by deciding to improve transport, education and healthcare infrastructure. African governments have chosen the policies that have brought the continent to where it is today. But where Africa is today is still a long way from where it could be. Affecting almost half of the population, absolute poverty is still endemic. African countries still occupy the bottom positions on the UN Human Development Index. And what is more, the continuation of growth is far from guaranteed. As today's report outlines, significant risks remain to Africa's prospects. It correctly notes that the spectre of violent political instability remains all too real, as we have seen in Mali, Nigeria and between North and South Sudan just in the last year. It highlights potential risks due to increased drug trafficking in a country like Guinea-Bissau. It also notes the political risk presented by a regime that has been in place for a very long time, as in countries like Angola or Cameroon, or on the flip side, where recent transition makes events unpredictable, like in North Africa. But on the economic front too, the report raises a very prominent issue still to be addressed: the continuing focus on the production and export of primary commodities, which leaves African economies too vulnerable to the shifting sands of international markets. Only diversification into higher value-added activities in manufacturing and services will deliver the broad prosperity and enduring stability that Africa's people want and deserve. How best to achieve this is up to African countries to decide, and by this I mean both people and governments. As EU Trade Commissioner, I believe improved governance and open markets need to be at the heart of any solution. Let me give you some examples of how poor governance continues to slow development today. First, education is a vital foundation for future prosperity. But research in Tanzania estimates that public primary school teachers do not show up for work almost 25% of the time. The researchers explain that this is because teaching jobs are often filled through political patronage instead of on merit. Second, high transport costs limit Africans' ability to sell otherwise competitive products. However, despite the fact that road quality has vastly improved on the main continental routes, costs have not come down. Why? Because closed shop regulation allows trucking companies to keep prices high. The costs of delivering a consignment are no higher than in France, but the lack of competition is holding trade back. Third, given Africa's scale, intra-regional trade could be a motor of growth. However, only 10 to 12% of Africa's trade takes place between African Union countries, with protective government policies a key limiting factor. What I would like to propose is that an open trade policy can be a tool for addressing bottlenecks like these. Trade liberalization agreements encourage growth, not only by opening new markets for exports, but also by making imported raw materials and components cheaper for domestic producers. This means companies are better placed to link up with global value chains, so far a key difference between Asia's and Africa's development stories. Trade agreements also perform a more fundamental role. By opening markets to competition, they take on vested interests that seek to distort government priorities. If there is one rule I have learned in my time as Trade Commissioner, it is that those most vocal against trade do not always have the collective interests at heart. Here's another way that trade contributes to better governance. Modern trade agreements don't just deal with tariffs, they also improve the way countries regulate. They include commitments to transparency, non-discrimination and consultation of interested parties. And they cover vital areas for growing economies like services regulation, investment, competition policy, public procurement and technical regulations for food and manufactured goods. That is why I'm so passionate in advocating the economic partnership agreements that the European Union is currently negotiating with 5 different African regions. The agreements would build on existing agreements that are already providing free access to Europe and a genuine partnership with the EU, as well as limited liberalisation on the African side. They would provide new rules and new market opening. They would be ambitious enough to solve real problems, but would do so in a way that takes full account of the level of development of our partners. Encouraging lower tariff barriers for import of machinery and key industrial inputs actually makes good business sense for African entrepreneurs. These efforts would be helped if we came to an agreement at the World Trade Organization on facilitating trade through streamlined customs procedures. The status quo is without doubt a drag on development. In sub-Saharan Africa, almost 10 documents are required to process a shipment. Goods take 35 days to be exported and 44 days to be imported at a cost per container of €1,300 for exports and €1,500 for imports. An agreement that tackled this type of problem would clearly be very significant. Ladies and gentlemen, your discussions today are all about risk. New approaches are certainly always risky. Particularly, I can tell you, when they involve trade liberalisation. But having the confidence to take risks is what politics is all about, and I firmly believe Africa's leaders have the confidence to take the continent forward. Thank you very much for your attention.